Welcome. I'm Ron Barnes. It's an honor to be president of our Rotary Club, and welcome to our celebration of service. And congratulations on finding parking today. Rumor had it was a little tough. Thought for the day. Look for something positive each day, even if some days you have to look a little harder. That makes sense. On a reflection, we have a world traveler to join us. Sarah Laughlin, will you please come up and share your reflection?
Dragging my napkin and forgetting my lozenge, which is par for the course. I think part of my mind might still be catching up with my body. So forgive me if I seem a little disoriented. I'm just back from the trip of a lifetime, a 37-day cruise through Asia. I'm still enjoying sensory overload, the geography, the history, the culture, the silk, the food, the jade, the sunrises and sunsets at sea, and most of all, the personal interactions with so many interesting people, including 2 Rotarians on our cruise, both who are wearing their pins and hats, and I was wearing neither. So today, I want to describe just one day in Vietnam. As many of you know, my husband was stationed at Da Nang Air Force Base in 1969. He worked in the open air terminal. He had the time of his life, living on China Beach, listening to Janis Joplin on the huge stereo in their air-conditioned hooch, and eating lobster and steak off the R&R flights with 4 young men who became fast friends. He talked about it for the rest of his life. What he failed to notice were the thousands of 55-gallon drums of Agent Orange lining the runways just outside the terminal. 40-some years later, he was diagnosed with a blood cancer related to that Agent Orange exposure, and he died in 2018. Late last year, one of the 4 comrades, Bill Cruz, contacted me. He found me through Tim's obit and wanted to send me a copy of the book he'd written about Vietnam. I told him I was headed there in a month and would send pictures. In Hue, on February 21st, a steamy, hot, 90-plus degree day, we visited My Son Sanctuary, one of the most sacred sites of the Champa Kingdom, 400 to 1400 AD, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The tower temples are decorated with bas-reliefs depicting scenes from Hindu mythology, a reminder of the Indian influence in this part of Vietnam. Among the ruins were a number of bomb craters, remnants of American bombing during the Vietnam War. They're called the War of Independence or reunification. In Da Nang, we stopped at a marble carving shop just below Marble Mountain, a site Tim often talked about. A very steep mountain, it's right in the middle of town now. I tried to get a picture, but it's surrounded by small marble carving shops and other urban buildup. I saw the beach a couple miles away and snuck over from my tour group to get some photographs. The beach was just as gorgeous as Tim described, miles and miles of white sand. Since 2017, though, it's rimmed by luxury hotels, the result of Da Nang hosting the 2017 APEC summit. I took some more pictures. Back on the bus, we drove past the only remaining piece of the Da Nang Air Force Base, the helicopter hangars. They're unchanged since 1975, overgrown with weeds and behind buildings. I leaned over the people on the bus to get a few poor pictures. I cropped the best one and sent it to my Vietnam vet friends here, including Bill Cruz and Mike Baker and several neighbors and former business partners. All of them said it brought back floods of memories, and I was glad I had gone. The Vietnamese don't talk much about the war. The average age is 34. So as my son pointed out, they don't remember. It was their grandfather's or great-grandfather's war. But every once in a while, the War of Independence does come up. In the Mekong Delta, Agent Orange still hampers farming and fishing. In Hanoi, I visited a local home, and the patriarch was a 70-something Viet Cong veteran who was proud of being a spy man in Saigon during the war. The plaque he recently received for 50 years of membership in the Communist Party was prominently displayed in the small family, next to a small family shrine and a jar with a pickled cobra. Some of you asked me about the snake wine. I came away confirmed that war is hell. I'm proud to be Rotarian, focused on world peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That had to be a bittersweet trip for you and your memories. So thanks for sharing. I do want to, as Steve Moberly is coming up to introduce our guests, I want to take a point of personal privilege to introduce Bob Hamill, who was one of our Rotary Toast recipients a few years ago. So Bob, thank you for breaking bread with us today and being here.
Good afternoon, Rotarians and guests. We're so glad to see so many people here for a great program we're going to have shortly. It's my privilege to introduce our guests. First, I'd like to introduce Phil Eskew. Would you please stand from the Bloomington Sunrise Club? Well, Bob Hamill was just introduced, but would you wave again, Bob? Thank you. Former sports editor of the Herald Times, and John Laskowski, IU basketball star. Glad to have him with us again. June Wan from Rotaract at IU. Would you stand up, June? April Michelle of the Melbourne, Florida Club. Jen Tellep, a guest of April Michelle from Melbourne, Florida. Mike Nezelek, who is the sports editor of the Herald Times. William Melican of Portland, Maine Rotary Club. Pam Lucan, Judy Schroeder's guest. She's a physical therapist. And last but certainly not least, Ramona Beck from the, she has a Rotary Club scholarship winner and is at Ivy Tech. Thank you to all of our guests who came today.
Thank you, Steve. Joy, any online guests?
Yes, Ron, we do have online guests. In addition to Megan Gearhart joining us again from France, we have both Bill Murphy, our Rotarian, and his son, Mark Murphy, as his guest online today. And I think we have a few other guests, Mike Laros joining us, and hey, Mike, and then a whole host of our standard Zoomers.
Thanks,
Okay.
Joy. And we do have some birthdays to celebrate. Liz Irwin on March 29th and John Zodi on March 31st. And some Rotary anniversaries. Bryce Bowe, 7 years in Rotary. Mr. Rotary himself, Jim Bright, 17 years. And Hank Walder, 7 years. I know that she was introduced as a guest, but I'd like Heidi Scholes to come forward with our recipient of the Ivy Tech Scholarship. I was able to enjoy an evening with our scholars last Tuesday as the donors and the recipients gathered. And I thought it just appropriate for Heidi to officially introduce her as one of 3 Rotary Ivy Tech scholars. So Heidi.
Thank you, Ron. It is my great pleasure to introduce and congratulate Ramona Beck. Today, Ramona is a Rotary Scholarship recipient and Ivy Tech student. She will graduate with her associate degree in nursing in May. Having already practiced as a surgical technician and volunteer in Cuba, helping perform over 60 full hip and knee replacements, she's eager to use her skills in missionary medical services. Ramona comes to Ivy Tech after raising her 3 sons and helping to raise her grandchildren. I'm thrilled Ramona could join us today. Thank you.
Congratulations. Thank you. Thank you. In the near future, we'll get to meet the 2 other scholarship recipients. I would like to introduce Phil Eskew, who will introduce our program. And again, Phil now is president-elect of the Sunrise Club. So we honor Phil and wish him well in his new endeavors with the Sunrise Club.
We will fight for the cream and crimson, for the glory of old IU. Never daunted, we will not falter in the battle. We're tried and true. Indiana, our Indiana, Indiana, we're all for you.
That was Rotarian Connie Chikalis. I'm here today and I want to tell you how you develop and create the best athletic director. It started years ago. Delray Brooks was playing at Michigan City Rogers, and he came down to see Coach Knight about playing. He brought along with him Scott Dolson. And he said, I'll come to Indiana, but I want Scott to be one of the managers. So Scott was a manager for Coach Knight for 4 years. So you can imagine what he learned during that 4 years. After he graduated, he worked for the varsity club, which gave him the opportunity to know most of the Indiana alumni, particularly those that had money. After that time, he came to me, I was a trustee, and he said, I'd really like to be considered as athletic director. President McRobbie chose Fred Glass. Fred Glass appropriately chose Scott to be his assistant. So during the 10 years that Fred was the athletic director, Scott went out and got the money. So we have Bart Kaufman baseball field. We have Andy Moore softball field. We developed the north end zone and all the equipment and things, the Ames Shule Education Center. He also raised the money for the south end zone, Wilkinson Hall. His good friend Ned Fowle renovated the golf course. So doing all this, when Fred stepped down, Scott was the appropriate person to become the athletic director at Indiana University. Currently, he has a meeting once a week with all athletic directors in the Big Ten, and they discuss problems and issues and things like that. And Scott is the chair of that group. So ladies and gentlemen, the best athletic director in the Big Ten, Scott Dolson.
Wow, thank you so much for that nice introduction, Phil. I have to tell you a little more part to the Delray Brooks story. A little kind of funny addition to that is that Delray Brooks ended up transferring after the first semester of our sophomore year. And as Phil said, I was a package deal. So that made me think a little bit. We were home for holiday break, and it was time for me to come back to IU. Delray ended up going to Providence and played for Rick Pitino there, and Providence ended up making the Final Four the year we won the championship in '87. But I remember thinking, we're a package deal, so I hope I'm still good. I need to, get back to practice because I'm still going to be here at IU. I plan on being a part of the team. And I'll never forget, I walked into practice. It was the first practice I was there after break. And as I was walking down this hallway, it was outside of Coach Knight's locker room, I happened to run into him. And he looked at me and he said, "You're still here?" And I said, "Yeah, that's good, right?" And he said, "We'll just have to see about that." And so it was kind of funny. That was one of those awkward moments. But who would have thought all these years later that I am still here? And definitely Delray is a big part of that. I want to thank Phil, Dr. Eskew, as a trustee. I've said this so many times. I've said it to him. I don't know if we've ever had a trustee as active and as engaged as Phil Eskew was when he was a trustee, and continues to be involved. And certainly thank him for inviting me here, but more importantly for all he's done for IU over the years. We really appreciate it, Phil. And also want to recognize, I know Bob Hamill was recognized twice, but Bob has been, can't even adequately express what he's meant to IU athletics. And the thing that you may not know, because we know him so well here, and he's such a prominent figure in Bloomington, but in the Big Ten, in the Big Ten office and around the Big Ten, he is not just a historian, but he is just a legend in the Big Ten. And that's one of the things that's unique for me, to be around the Big Ten and the leaders in the Big Ten. And I take a lot of pride when Bob Hamill's name comes up when they're talking about history of the Big Ten. And so thank you for being here, Bob. It means a lot. I also wanted to just recognize Laz. It's great that Laz is here. As I'm sitting there with Laz, I'm thinking if Laz was on our team right now and we had a shooter like him, we'd still be in the tournament. That's what I was thinking. But I want to thank Laz. He's always been, my whole career, I've just had incredible people that have been incredibly nice to me and mentor me, and Laz is certainly one of those. John Hobson is sitting over here, who's in if there's an alumni director, alumni staff Hall of Fame, John would be in it. He was phenomenal. I grew up with John. He took me under his wing. And I tell you a funny thing about John, when I see him, I always think about, we had so many meetings. We put on several events together. I represent the varsity club and John represented the Alumni Association, and we would meet. And I believe a perfect example of that, we were meeting before a Big Ten tournament. We were having a huge pep rally. So John and I met, and in the meeting, John was the most organized person, probably still is. He had this big list of all the things that we need to bring to this pep rally, pom-poms and signage and really he had it all, but he had down that, "Scott, you need to bring the raffle tickets." So I said, "Got it, gotcha." So we left. We go fast forward. We're up in Chicago. Go down to the ballroom, and I was busy doing other things. And I walk in. I'm a little late, and John said, "Do you have the raffle tickets?" I'm like, "Oh, John, they're in my room." He goes, No, don't worry. I've got the extra ones." I'm like, "What do you mean?" He goes, he showed me his list that said extra raffle tickets in case Scott forgets them. That was pretty good, John. He thought of everything. So again, I want to thank you for being here. What I thought I'd do today, there's so much going on in college athletics. Well, I should mention our women's basketball team first. I have to mention them. Sorry. How about that game? And honestly, I thought about being at the Rotary Club and Rotarians. I thought of you last night after halftime, and they went on a run and they hit a few threes in a row there. And I thought, man, that'll be tough going to speak tomorrow if we don't get this done. So I think they had a little extra motivation knowing I was doing this today. But what a great win. And I'm so proud of our program. I'm so proud of Coach Morin and what she's developed. We talk about developing championship programs a lot, and she certainly has done that. It's a great team, a great group of young women, in multiple ways, what they've meant to Hoosier Nation, to the community. But it's, again, it's a program. I'm so proud of her. So thank you to our fans for all the support. The outpouring of support for women's basketball has been off the charts, and it's been so fun. I can't tell you, wherever I go, people say, I watched that women's game, or boy, when we beat Iowa. I mean, it's really what we want. And who would have thought 10 years ago that we would average 10,000 fans a game for a season for our women's basketball program? So anyway, that's great. But what I thought I'd do is there's so many topics. We even talked about a few of them at my table. I thought I'd hit on a few hot topics around college athletics, and then certainly leave time for questions, because I know there's lots of things. I may skip over something quickly, but it's such a transformational time. I took over as athletic director. I'm just finishing my 4th year. And knowing I was coming here this morning, I think it's almost 4 years exactly. And so I put down what has happened in those 4 years, because I keep saying to my wife, things are going to calm down. And then she's like, finally, she's like, no, they're not. It's just kind of that time. So here's what's happened since I took over as AD. Certainly COVID hit the week I was named AD. And so the week I was named AD, there actually wasn't a press conference even to announce it, which was fine. I didn't need a press conference, but that actually, I was named AD on Tuesday, and we shut the office down on Friday. So that was when I was named. The George Floyd racial unrest and all that transpired with that happened shortly after that. We had a financial structural deficit in the athletic department that was looming. Fred and I had worked on that prior to him leaving, but then COVID hit, and the financial structure of the athletic department had to be reworked. We basically eliminated 36 jobs. The financial crisis in the department was something that probably publicly people didn't know as much about, but it was really a major challenge. We went through the men's basketball transition in moving on from Archie Miller and bringing on Coach Woodson. Conference expansion happened, USC, UCLA, lots of things at the conference office. It was just a crazy time. We renegotiated a new media rights deal for the Big Ten, and I actually ended up being on the TV subcommittee and worked extensively. We could talk for the next hour just about that TV deal. It was a fascinating experience, but just a crazy opportunity. We had a new president start. President Witten started, which is a huge transition for everybody, but certainly with athletics, with all that's going on, to adapt to her and to partner with her was a new opportunity for us. The addition of NIL. How much do you guys hear about NIL? So that came on board, a new thing, a concept that how are we going to figure that out? Then we got a new conference commissioner, Tony Petitti. Big adjustment with that. Ended up, as Phil said, taking over as chair of the ADs. So that was a big opportunity as well, but just a time of transition. Another conference expansion with Oregon and Washington, which transpired. Actually, Heidi and I were at a wedding out east, which was kind of our big thing for this summer, and the conference expansion. I'm not saying so you feel sorry for me. It was a great opportunity, but we were out east for this wedding, and I spent 2 days in the hotel room, never leaving, because it was time to negotiate the conference expansion with Tony Petitti in Oregon and Washington. The football transition from Coach Allen to Coach Signetti, which I'll talk about in a minute. The transfer portal and all that's happened with that. And now the college football playoffs. So I say all that. I love my job. I feel like it's the opportunity of a lifetime. I never look forward to going to work, which I've always looked forward to going to work, but I never have as much as I do now. But all those things have just happened in the last 4 years. And sometimes we as a staff sit back and think, what was it like before the chaos? Because that's really what it is. And as I speak to other athletic directors around the country, that's really what's going on. It's just a chaotic time. When will it ever stabilize? Which it will, but it's so much uncharted territory. So the three things that I'll touch on just quickly, and again, and I'm going to touch on some departmental issues as well. But from a conference expansion standpoint, and this is probably stating the obvious, but why 18 teams? I do get approached by different fans, alumni, or people I talk to, and they'll say, why are we adding these West Coast teams? It doesn't feel right. We're kind of used to the tradition of the Big Ten. And really, it was really two big things. And again, the first one everyone will say is the obvious. It was timing. From a television media rights opportunity, the Big Ten media rights deal was expiring at about the same time the Pac-12 media rights deal was expiring. And if you remember, Oklahoma and Texas left the Pac-12 and went to the SEC. And so if there was ever a time to make a change, it was a kind of an inflection point where it was that time when we're going to have to do it. So adding USC and UCLA was really an opportunity because it wasn't costing anything because they had an opportunity because their media rights deal was up. And what happens is your membership in those leagues is really tied to your media rights deal. So when that's up, you can leave without penalty. Once you sign a new deal, you have to stay with the conference as long as that deal is in existence. So we were able to add USC, UCLA. At the same time, we were renegotiating our deal, brought the West Coast TV markets to the Big Ten, which was a significant boom for the rights fee that the networks were going to pay. So that was big. The second thing is that with all the craziness in college athletics, it's really all about making certain you have control. How do you make certain you have influence, votes? What's going to happen as college athletics changes? And so by adding those schools, it gave the Big Ten more depth, really more power in terms of moving forward and what's going to happen with college athletics. And then finally, I think it's important to note, and President Whitten was awesome in the expansion talks, is that they fit academically. And honestly, if the TV situation, if the media rights value was there, and it was a really good opportunity for the Big Ten to add a school, but they didn't fit academically into what the Big Ten's all about, I can assure you it just wouldn't happen because ultimately those decisions are at the presidential level. The athletic directors would make those recommendations to the conference commissioner, but if that wouldn't make sense from an academic standpoint, we wouldn't do it. So that's huge. So that's why we've added those schools. What's happening now is really a lot of the planning from an integration standpoint for now the 4 schools, obviously, that we added, obviously Washington, Oregon as well. From a scheduling standpoint, we worked really hard to make certain that we can balance the schedule so we're not making too many trips out west. People ask a lot. I think someone said when I sat down, well, what's it going to be like? Are we going to send field hockey out west? Are we going to send baseball, softball? And the answer is yes, but we're going to do it in a way that is not intrusive at all. We'll try to schedule it in a way that if you go out, you might hit 2 schools at once, have over a weekend, and then come back. For example, football, as part of the new football schedule, football will only travel out west 1 time a year, maximum. That's just the way it's going to work throughout the Big Ten. We'll have 1 football trip. Now, what I would be worried about more is if I was one of the West Coast schools, because they'll have to come this way more often. But one of the things I always remind people is that we've got a water polo program that's very successful that play 90% of their matches, away matches, are on the West Coast. Our water polo program has made 7 or 8 trips out west a year for their season. So we're kind of good at it. We understand academically how to schedule, how to make certain we can handle that. So it's not as big of a deal as probably it's made out to, but it's a huge deal for the conference in terms of expansion. The next topic they'll hit on briefly is the college football playoff. You may have read about that. There's been lots of discussions on the future of the college football playoff. In why I think that's important. I bring that up today because you might think, why does that impact IU? What does the college football playoff have to do with, obviously we'd love to get there someday, but it's a huge opportunity. It's a huge revenue stream. And what's happened is college football playoff has decided to go from 4 teams to 12 teams. There's a governing body over that made that work. What hadn't been decided yet was basically what's going to be the access to the college football playoff. Who qualifies? Is it just going to be the top 12 ranked teams? How will that work? And then secondly, where does the money go that's generated from the college football playoff? So basically, there's an announcement last week that was really, I think, significant in terms of the Big Ten and the SEC were able to, because of the size of our leagues, back to when I said that we added USC, UCLA, Oregon, and Washington, because of the size and the power of the programs in the Big Ten and the SEC, as they added Texas and Oklahoma, that basically the way it ended up, the decision moving forward is that our 2 conferences are going to each share 29% each of the overall revenue that comes in from a television perspective, which is significant, much more than we had before. And then ultimately, the future format of the college football playoff is going to be discussed among everyone involved, but the SEC and the Big Ten are really going to have more control over that. So that's kind of an interesting point in time where, back to what I said, why we added those schools earlier, it really helps from a future planning standpoint. College football playoff that is just a major thing that we've been heavily involved in that is really important for the future. The other big thing just nationally, and I'll talk about some internal stuff to our department, really is just the future model of college athletics. You read and hear about so many different things. I mentioned a few of the topics earlier, whether it's revenue share, whether it's NIL, it's transfer portal, it's all of the above, all those different hot topics. Where is this going? What's going to happen with the NCAA? How many people do you talk to and they say, well, the NCAA is going to go away. What's going to happen with the NCAA? So all that is being worked on in terms of there's lots of different ideas. It seems that everywhere you go, you hear different ideas about the future of college athletics. Private equity get involved in somehow controlling college football. What is the future? And what we're doing now is the Big Ten and the SEC have partnered together to really have, I would call it more of a think tank, is we're like-minded schools and like-minded goals to come together and try to plan out what should it look like? What should college athletics transform into? And the thing that I want to assure you is all the things that we stand for, that we feel good about in terms of being an education-based model. I don't think you hear anybody out there saying, let's get away from it being an education-based model. All the great things from an education standpoint need to be there. We believe in broad-based programming, meaning that we support women's basketball just like we do football. We support our tennis teams, our swimming programs. The Big Ten and the SEC believe in broad-based programming. We believe in gender equity, Title IX, all the advances that we've made there. And so you have to kind of have those as fundamental foundations of what you stand for. Then ultimately, it's going to change. There's going to be additional benefits be delivered to student athletes in some form or another. And what that looks like, I'm not sure. There's more questions than answers right now, but we're getting all the right people around the table to help try to guide that and try to put together a model that is sustainable. Because right now, with NIL, with all the chaos, you feel like it's just not quite sustainable right now, to be honest with you. It feels like we're sort of creating this mirage through NIL to really help fund payments to players. Is that really, or to student athletes, is that really the way that the future should go? And there's lots of different ideas on that, but I'm optimistic and I feel very good about the fact the Big Ten is partnering with the SEC to really look at it from a big picture standpoint. So those are some of the kind of more national issues. Excuse me. From a internal standpoint, we spend a lot of time talking about balance. What I mean by that is we balance our day-to-day priorities, which is certainly compliance. You heard Fred Glass. Nothing changed from when Fred was here to when I took over in terms of we still believe in making certain that compliance, academics, be integrated with our university, winning is certainly important. And then our personal development, all those things are our priorities. But at the same time, we have to really focus on the future. We have to focus on making certain that we don't get left behind. From a revenue generating standpoint, it's something I spend a great deal of my time on, is making certain that we can continue to generate the revenue that we need to be a highly functioning department. I'm gonna grab that water real quick. Thank you. Revenue generation is something I spend a great deal of time on, and it's stating the obvious. We have to have the revenue to operate, but at the same time, from an NIL perspective, NIL is not something that's just something extra that we do because everyone else does it. To be competitive today, we have to have a robust NIL program. And through Hoosiers for Good, Hoosiers Connect, which were developed under a volunteer leadership group, organized through Pete Yonkman, local head of Cook, it's been fantastic. Without Hoosiers for Good and Hoosiers Connect and the support we receive from them, honestly, we wouldn't be able to compete. We just wouldn't. We wouldn't have been able to hire Coach Signetti if we didn't have a robust NIL program. And whether people agree with NIL, disagree with it, lots of opinions on it, from our perspective and me in my role in the department is we really don't have the luxury of saying we're in or we're out. We're in because we want to compete. So if we're in, let's do it right. And I believe, in fact, I've been told by several people around the country, our setup is as good, if not better, than anyone who has it set up. We do it right. Student athletes have to work for their money, but it's certainly a robust program right now that is enable us to sustain things. Overall, in the department right now, it's honestly, I feel like it's going really well. I feel like right now our academic numbers are fantastic. We set records last year that we broke this year, academic all Big Tens. I'm so proud of our student athletes that the priority, our balance is still there. Competitively, we're leading the Big Ten right now in Big Ten championships. We have 4 Big Ten championships this year, and that's tops in the league, with men's soccer having 2, with the regular season and their postseason, and with men's swimming and diving and women's swimming and diving. So we feel good about where we are competitively, certainly across the board. It's something we talk about winning a lot. And when we talk about winning, it's not because it's just important because that's my job or our job, or we want to make our fans happy. What I talk about with our student athletes a lot, and I talk about our coaches a lot, is that if we truly want to maximize the opportunity for our student athletes, which we do 100%, winning is a big part of that. And as we go through exit interviews with our student athletes, it's really interesting because the student athletes who've had a chance to compete at a high level, that have played for a Big Ten championship, who have really had a big win, have had an opportunity to compete in postseason, their experience is a lot better than student athletes who haven't. So for me, winning is something we talk about because I think it's part of the experience. It's part of the learning experience. So our women's basketball team, what they've done, and you've seen as we built this program, the postseason interviews we have, the exit interviews, we talk to women's basketball players, it's unbelievable compared to the way it used to be because of that opportunity. They've learned how to win. It's been part of the learning experience. We talk about winning a lot. Speaking of that, the transition with football, I think I need to touch on that a little bit because that was certainly a big decision. It was one that I felt, and ultimately, I really thank President Whitten for supporting that recommendation. That although it was a big expense to make that change, that it was really not can we afford to make the change. The question was, can we afford not to? And I felt like ultimately that back to what I was talking about with the Big Ten and conference expansion and the new media rights package, the Big Ten is 85%, the revenues generated are 85% football. And the schools we've added were critical to building the football base in the Big Ten. And I felt like that, although I was very, very close with Coach Allen, and to this day, I wouldn't be human if I didn't feel guilty because you want it to work out. But I felt like football was so important to the Big Ten, I didn't want us to be left behind. And I felt like we needed to a new direction. And so what we did on that, I think it's important that I touch on that. Then I'll open up for questions because I don't want to take too long. But in making the football change, and this is probably one of the benefits of maybe being around for a long time, is we didn't want to just go into the change and just start a search if we made the change. We wanted to be ready. And that wasn't to mean that I'd hope that we didn't have to make the change, but we had to be ready. So one of the things that we did is I worked with a couple of staff members of the department, and we put together a study both internally in terms of we looked at particularly the last 30 years of Indiana football. We looked at the history of Indiana football, and we asked a lot of questions. We said, when we've done well, are there any consistencies? Why did we do well? What has worked and what hasn't worked? Because we've had some moments in football, and we really dug deep into that and tried to see if there were any consistencies. So we looked from Bill Mallory's years on up. We could go through, and one of the things that we found, and again, it's not a revelation, but if you put all this down, it sort of helps you formulate how do you put yourself from a risk management perspective, how do you put yourself in a position where you might have success? So one of the things Bill Mallory did is he had a blueprint. He truly had this is how Bill Mallory, and Spud Washington's here, who played for Coach Mal, he knew exactly how to run a program. He knew what was important to him. He had this blueprint. And so that was really important. That experience was really important. He had been a head coach twice before at Colorado, Northern Illinois, or Miami as well, 3 times. So we looked at that. Then we also took a great deal of time, and we looked at schools like us. We felt we could compare ourselves to. We looked at North Carolina, we looked at Duke, we looked at Kentucky, we looked at Kansas, we looked at Purdue, we looked at Illinois. We said, okay, what have they done differently to become consistent in football? And not all of them have been consistent winners. Kansas had really struggled until the last 5 years, let's say. And so we tried to really dig in deep in those programs. What did they do And therefore, if we're ever in a position where we're looking for a head coach, which at this point we looked into this, we didn't know whether we would be or not. But if we ever are in that position, what can we learn from that? So we looked internally at our history, dug deep. We looked at those programs, dug deep, looked at their resources they put in football across the board, put together this big report. And therefore, when we did make the change in football, we had a whole plan put together that enabled us to move quickly. And what I mean by that is our game plan, we put together a pro forma that we felt like, here are the qualities that we need in a head coach and a candidate that puts us in a position based on all this information we've gathered that we potentially could have some consistent winning, some consistency. So let me just give you a couple examples of that. We felt like on our list that we had to hire an existing head coach or one that had major head coach experience. Like that was, we didn't want to hire a coordinator. We felt like we had to hire someone that has done it. We felt like that we had to have someone who had a blueprint for success, who really understood. They'd been a head coach, but they knew how to build a program. They knew what being a head coach meant and had a blueprint for that. We felt like we needed to hire a coach who was offensive minded and more importantly, had a proven ability to develop quarterbacks. We felt like as we've studied these other programs that have had success, developing quarterbacks was a consistent theme. And again, it sounds like, well, yeah, if you have a great quarterback, you could win. But if you have a coach who hasn't really done that, you have to then hire a coordinator who you trust to get that done. And we felt like the coaches who've had experience in developing quarterbacks, it was massive. We wanted someone was a proven recruiter, a real track record of not just recruiting, but identifying talent. And then finally, all the intangibles, someone had high character, that we felt would be a fit here. And so ultimately, when we did make the change and we had this whole plan together, and we worked with a search firm, and a lot of people say, well, why do you work with a search firm? What do they do? Are they going to tell you who to hire? Search firms, it depends on the position you're looking for. They were invaluable because it's just time. They can cut through the time. So we met with a search firm, laid out our plan. Then the search firm, they have all the agents' names, they have phone numbers. They can quickly, literally, I informed Tom Allen that we were making the change on Sunday morning after the Purdue game at 9 a.m., met with the team at 10:30, the full team, met with the leadership council of the team at 11, was up in my office, had to make a couple calls just from a university perspective. And by 12:30, our search firm already was setting up. I think I had 10 phone calls that afternoon with candidates that were based on the information that I had provided them that fit our profile. I talked to Coach Signetti at like 5:30 on Sunday. And honestly, it was so funny when I hung up from him, given what I've just told you, my hour-long first conversation with him, he talked about almost everything we had on our list. He said, hey, I grew up under my dad as a head coach, worked under Nick Saban. My big thing is I have a blueprint. He talked about his blueprint and how you build a winning program, for half the call. Talked about developing quarterbacks. He talked about how he's been a recruiting coordinator wherever he's been. All the boxes that we wanted checked, he checked. And so ultimately through that process, and we don't have time to go through then how to get to Wednesday night when we offered him the job and he accepted and got the deal done Thursday. So from that Sunday at 12:30 till Wednesday night, Thursdays when we got kind of the deal done with his agent, that was just a constant process. But the foundation of the plan we put together enabled us to be in a position to know what we were looking for and then find what we felt at the time was a perfect fit. Again, he hasn't coached the game yet, just had his third spring practice today, and there's a lot of work to be done. But given what the data, all the information we have, we feel like we're in a good position. And then from a department standpoint, because of the need for football to be successful, because of the Big Ten, we felt like we had to invest in that to put us in a position so we can move our program forward. We don't want to be ever in a position where we're an afterthought. And that's what that is. So with that, that's kind of a lot, but I thought I'd just touch on some of those topics. We've got 10 minutes left, I think, and I'd be happy to answer questions or go into more detail on anything anybody wants.
Hey, Scott, thank you so much for being here.
Sure.
John Armstrong, we've met a couple of times. When it comes to the NIL, I think a lot of people don't fully appreciate the fact that it's the college years for a vast majority of student athletes when they have the opportunity to make any profit from their name, image and likeness. It's not just basketball and football. And what I observe from your department is that if you're going to do NIL, do it right. And some things that I've observed, I wonder if you could talk quickly about what Hoosiers for Good does, the opportunities it provides for nonprofits in our area. And then also, I noticed early on that you guys got out really far ahead in working with firms to help students understand the business aspect of them and their opportunities. So they learned how to manage those opportunities and create their own brand and be an entrepreneur, essentially. So could you speak to that?
Sure. Well, thank you for asking that. Yeah, the first thing is that what Hoosiers for Good does is they partner with charities and want to help them grow, help them raise money, help them establish their brand in a more prominent way. So what we'll do is have our student athletes, for example, if you remember Taiwan Mullen, who was a really good cornerback for us in football, he partnered with the Boys and Girls Club. And part of what he did was do a lot of activities where he would go there, but also he would tweet about it. He would do different things to really bring attention to the Boys Club and really help them raise money and help them. And again, I appreciate you saying that we do it the right way. A lot of schools, it's really kind of a phony deal. They really don't. They just kind of give the money and you don't really have too much work for it, even though that's against the rules. So that's great. In terms of the education piece, we spend a great deal of time, whether it's financial management, whether it's tax consulting, so they understand if you're making money, this is what that means. There's a whole education, it's brand building. How do I establish my brand on social media? We have a very comprehensive NIL program that, in fact, we have a meeting with a recruit this afternoon at 3. And this recruit is coming in, it's a pretty high profile recruit. We've got a whole presentation that it's not just about, hey, how much money can I make there? If that's all you're interested in, we're probably not the school for you. If you're interested in getting your degree, maximizing your opportunity athletically, and learning a ton about from a management standpoint, how to manage your money, how to build your NIL profile, and you're going to make some money, I think we might want to talk because we'd be a good fit. So I'm proud of the way, and again, Hoosiers for Good, Hoosiers Connect, Pete Yonkman, the whole group, I don't know where we'd be without them, honestly.
Hi, Scott. John Weichert.
Yeah.
Quick question. You've talked about student athletes, and I appreciate the reference to the student part of that. The transfer portal presents both challenges and opportunities, obviously. As you're recruiting in the transfer portal and you're talking about the Big Ten Conference and visibility and facilities and player development, how are you working with students on issues like credit transfer, on issue like degree path, on issue like graduation rates? How are you handling that institutionally?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's still there's concerns. You know, you transfer multiple times. What is that going to do in terms of your progress towards degree? The NCAA rules have not changed in terms of you still, when you transfer, you have to transfer with enough credits that move you along in your progress to degree far enough that you're eligible to compete. So what happens at times, some of the misnomers or misunderstandings with transfer portal is that doesn't mean that you can just transfer 4 times after my freshman year, sophomore year, junior, and senior year and automatically be eligible if I don't keep up with my academics. So there are safeguards in place from that standpoint. But I would be, less than transparent if I didn't say that it is concerning in terms of the more times you transfer, more difficult it is to maintain your academic standing. And particularly when you have student athletes that are so busy with their sport, we do have concerns of what the long-term impact will be from a graduation rate standpoint. But to stay eligible, you still have to maintain your passing a certain number of credit hours to be eligible at that next school you go to. But it's a great point. It's a hot topic for discussion.
Hi, Sam Medak. Thank you for being here today. I just have a 2-part question. College sports traditionally has been a fairly regional and in a lot of ways parochial sport for most of its history. And I think to its benefit, it creates a passion and fan bases that I think is sort of lacking in pro sports. With the chaos of realignment and the difficulty of the actual physical geographical scheduling as the Big Ten grows, how committed is the conference to sort of at least attempting to protect some of those more parochial relationships between different schools and athletics? And secondly, when are we building Coach Moran's statue?
Well, there's no question that, promoting collegiality, promoting all the good things that the Big Ten has always stood for, none of that has changed. And now I know that the adding the West Coast schools and increasing the footprint it's just, I remember when we added Penn State, and I've been around a long time. And I remember we added Penn State and I was like, it's gonna be 11. What's it gonna, it didn't feel right. And then it, expanded from there. And so what I always am concerned about, which the good news is I don't have a reason to be concerned right now, is if we change our values, if we change who we are in the Big Ten, and from how we share revenue to what's important from a priority standpoint, sportsmanship, different things, and particularly with our new commissioner, Tony Petitti, I'm confident that we still have the same values and stand for the same things we always have.
Okay, we have
And
time.
Coach Moore, yeah, she's awesome.
We have time for one more question. Joy, is there anyone online? I want to make sure we don't exclude our,
Thanks for checking. No questions here.
Jim, you're it.
Glad you're not the CEO of the Los Angeles Dodgers. How do you monitor betting on the part of student athletes?
Yeah, we really work hard at that. The Big Ten has a partnership with a company, and I can't remember. I'm really sorry. I can't remember the name of it. But we would work closely with the Big Ten, and they have an analytical system that they watch and work with the Department of Homeland Security. I don't know, that really monitors that aspect of it to see if there's any. There's been some cases around the country where they've seen through the system of analytics where there's some inconsistencies with betting. That's externally. Internally, we do so much education. I worry about it because betting has become so easy. I know just across the campus, regular students, just the online betting. So we work really hard at educating our student athletes, making certain they understand the rules, they understand the pitfalls, and also just how it can long-term impact the rest of your life. And so our education program outside of their academics, whether it's sexual misconduct, whether it's gambling, whether it's hazing, we spend a ton of time on that. I'm really proud of our efforts in that area, but it is one of those things that I do worry about a lot because I think there's a lot of ways you can go down the wrong path. So let me just say thank you so much and if I'll stick around for a few minutes if others have some questions, but thank you for your support. Go IU.
Wow, obviously our athletic department is under great leadership, and thank you for being here, Scott. We really appreciate it. A donation will be made to the Sycamore Land Trust in your honor for your presentation today. And we'll have a drawing next week for the next quarter of our donations for speakers. I would like to make some acknowledgements. Again, this meeting wouldn't exist without the help of Liz Feidel, who is our greeter, Steve Moberly, who introduced our guests, Joy Harder, who was our Zoom host, Sarah Laughlin on her reflection, Marilyn Wood, who is our reporter, Tracy Jovanovic for her great work with a camera and mic, and obviously Tyler for his work as our producer. Again, the next meeting will be April 2nd. Joe Throckmorton will be our presenter, and we will be in Stateroom East. So let's hope for easy parking and a great week. If you all stand and join me in the four-way test of the things we think, say, and believe. First, is it the truth? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Or will it build goodwill and better friendships? Or will it be beneficial to all concerned? And fifth, is it fun?